Long ago, before the skies were patrolled by flying champions and the streets were safeguarded by individuals wielding the power of the elements, the world was a wonderfully mundane place. It was a realm governed strictly by the unwavering laws of physics, biology, and gravity. Humanity moved through its days with a quiet, predictable rhythm, completely unaware that the very fabric of human evolution was teetering on the precipice of a radical, breathtaking transformation. The shift did not arrive with a catastrophic meteor descending from the heavens, nor did it manifest as a sudden, violent shift in the Earth's tectonic plates. Rather, the dawn of this new era began with a soft, warm, and entirely inexplicable glow inside a quiet hospital delivery room. One day, in the bustling, densely populated heart of Qingqing City, China, a child was born. However, as the medical staff rushed to clear the infant's lungs and swaddle the newborn in standard hospital blankets, a profound and unprecedented anomaly occurred. The child began to radiate a brilliant, luminescent aura, casting a gentle, ethereal light that completely illuminated the sterile walls of the maternity ward. This light was not merely a reflection or a trick of the fluorescent bulbs overhead. It was an organic, biological luminescence pulsing steadily from the very skin of the infant. The doctors and nurses stood in stunned, breathless silence, their fundamental understanding of human biology instantly shattered by the soft, glowing presence of the world's very first recorded superhuman manifestation. As time passed, this isolated miracle in Qingqing City proved not to be a mere anomaly, but rather the first spark of a global evolutionary wildfire. Similar phenomena began to erupt in every conceivable corner of the world. Children in Tokyo suddenly found they could levitate their wooden blocks. Teenagers in New York discovered they could summon crackling fire with the simple snap of their fingers. Elders in London realized their aging skin had inexplicably taken on the impenetrable properties of hardened steel. The world was swiftly swept into a chaotic, exhilarating, and terrifying age of discovery. Soon, the vast majority of the global population, roughly 80% of all humanity, had obtained these extraordinary superhuman powers, which society colloquially termed quirks. With the dawn of quirks, the world was forced to violently and rapidly adapt. The sudden empowerment of millions led to unprecedented societal challenges, as those with malicious intent or selfish desires used their newfound abilities for personal gain, theft, and widespread destruction. The crime rate skyrocketed, and traditional law enforcement found itself hopelessly outmatched by criminals who could shatter concrete with their bare hands or melt steel with their breath. But just as the darkness rose, so too did the light. People with righteous hearts and unwavering moral compasses stepped forward, utilizing their quirks to protect the innocent, suppress the chaotic uprisings, and uphold justice. Due to this societal necessity, people were able to pursue heroism not just as a noble comic book ideal, but as a legitimate, regulated, and highly respected profession. The fantasies of yesteryear had stepped off the ink-stained pages and into the sunlit streets. Yet, in this spectacular world of gods, titans, and marvels, that 20% of the population remained entirely ordinary, completely untouched by the light of evolution. They were relics of a bygone era, forced to navigate a world that had outgrown them. This is the story of one such boy, a child whose heart burned brighter than any quirk, but whose body was tragically ordinary. Before the bustling train stations and the towering, prestigious high schools, there was simply a neighborhood playground, bathed in the golden, fading light of a late afternoon sun. The air was thick with the innocent sounds of children playing, the creak of swing sets, and the rustle of leaves. However, a darker, far more cruel undertone had begun to infect the sandboxes. In the shadow of a towering oak tree, a younger Izuku Midoriya stood with his arms spread wide, his small, frail body positioned as a desperate, trembling barrier. Behind him, another child cowered in the dirt, weeping quietly, clutching a bruised knee and looking up in sheer terror. Standing opposite young Izuku was Katsuki Bakugo, a boy whose volatile quirk had manifested early, granting him the terrifying and awe-inspiring ability to secrete nitroglycerin-like sweat from his palms and ignite it at will. Katsuki was flanked by two lackeys, his hands popping and crackling with miniature localized explosions that smelled sharply of burnt sugar and ozone. The miniature blasts cast erratic, menacing shadows across Katsuki's confident, incredibly arrogant face. Izuku's knees knocked together violently beneath his shorts, his breath hitched in his throat, and tears threatened to spill from his wide, terrified green eyes. Yet, despite the overwhelming, suffocating fear, he did not step aside. He raised his small fists, trembling like leaves in a gale, and attempted to reason with the aggressive boy. He pleaded for the cruelty to stop, his voice shaking, but his spirit unwavering. He asserted, with the innocent conviction of a child who worshipped heroes, that true champions did not use their powers to hurt those weaker than themselves. Katsuki did not take the boy seriously. To Katsuki, the hierarchy of the new world was glaringly simple. Strength ruled, and weakness was an open invitation for subjugation. He sneered, his ruby-red eyes narrowing with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. He mocked Izuku, weaponizing his given name by calling him Deku, a cruel linguistic twist that translated to useless or one who can achieve nothing. Katsuki mocked him relentlessly for being completely quirkless, finding it pathetically amusing that a boy without a single drop of power was attempting to play hero against someone so clearly destined for greatness. With a wicked, feral grin, Katsuki lunged forward, his palm thrusting out. A bright, concussive flash of heat and light erupted from his hand. The impact of the miniature explosion threw young Izuku backward, leaving him scorched, bruised, and staring up at the darkening sky, fundamentally realizing the cruelest truth of his reality. Years flowed by, transforming the small, weeping boy into a 14-year-old adolescent, yet the fire of his ambition refused to be fully smothered by the cold, unforgiving reality of his existence. Izuku had learned to survive in a world of gods by becoming its most devoted, meticulous scholar. He walked the streets of Musatafu, Japan, with his head constantly on a swivel, his vibrant green eyes scanning the urban skyline for the flash of a cape, the crackle of lightning, or the roar of an elemental clash. On one particularly crisp morning, during his daily commute to middle school, the mundane routine of the city was shattered by a booming, seismic roar that rattled the windows of nearby storefronts and sent flocks of pigeons scattering into the clouds. A gigantic criminal, an enormous villain whose head resembled a grotesque amalgamation of a beast, had gone on a sudden rampage near the bustling Tatooine station. The villain was a terrifying spectacle, a towering behemoth of muscular bulk who had utilized his quirk for illegal purposes, stealing a civilian's bag, and now lashing out in a blind panic at the authorities who had managed to corner him beneath the intricate, overarching steel framework of the commuter train tracks. Izuku sprinted toward the commotion, his heavy yellow backpack bouncing against his shoulders, his heart hammering a staccato rhythm against his ribs. He pushed his way through the gathering crowd of excited onlookers, his eyes wide with an analytical fervor that bordered on obsession. The scene unfolding before him was a breathtaking masterclass in modern professional heroics. Several pro-heroes had already arrived on the scene, establishing a perimeter and demonstrating the synchronized efficiency of modernized, super-powered law enforcement. To the far left of the intersection, the renowned rescue specialist known as Backdraft stood firm. Utilizing his unique water pump quirk, Backdraft generated high-pressure streams of water from the nozzle-like appendages on his arms, sweeping the fluid in wide, crossing arcs to keep the panicked citizens at a safe distance from the collapsing debris and the sweeping fists of the giant. Nearby, the incredibly muscular punching hero Death Arms demonstrated immense physical prowess by catching a massive falling energy pole before it could crush a group of trapped commuters, his heavily corded arms straining under the immense, crushing weight. However, the primary combatant actively engaging the giant villain was Kamui Woods, a rising star in the hero community, whose entire body appeared to be composed of rugged, flexible timber. Kamui darted through the air, using his arbor quirk to extend his wooden limbs, swinging gracefully from the train station's infrastructure with breathtaking agility. Kamui Woods vocalized his authoritative intent, his voice echoing over the sirens, stating clearly that the villain had used his quirk for illegal purposes and that his rampage ended now. With a dramatic, fluid flourish, Kamui extended his arm, the wood splintering and rapidly growing into a complex, sprawling, branching net. He initiated his signature move, the lacquered chain prison, in a calculated, sweeping attempt to securely bind the gigantic villain and stop his destructive movement. Just as Kamui Woods' intricate wooden tendrils were about to successfully ensnare the beastly, thrashing villain, a massive, unnatural shadow fell over the intersection, blotting out the morning sun. The ground trembled violently, mimicking a minor earthquake, as a colossal foot slammed onto the paved street. Out of nowhere, a towering female figure intercepted the battle, completely dwarfing both Kamui Woods and the giant villain. It was Mount Lady, a brand new heroine who possessed a gigantification quirk, allowing her to drastically increase her physical size to a staggering monumental scale. With a booming, triumphant shout that rattled the teeth of the onlookers, Mount Lady leaped into the air. She executed a devastating flying kick directly into the giant villain's jaw, a spectacular ultimate move she proudly announced to the world as her Canyon Cannon. The sheer kinetic force of the impact instantly defeated the criminal, sending his massive body crashing into the pavement in a blinding cloud of concrete dust and shattered asphalt. The battle was over in an instant, hijacked by the newcomer. The crowd erupted into thunderous, awe-struck applause, and a swarm of paparazzi rushed forward, their camera shutters clicking furiously to capture the moment. Mount Lady, relishing the attention, struck a glamorous, provocative pose for the media. She smiled radiantly down at the flashing bulbs, declaring boldly that today was her official debut and asking for the rest of the city's protection to be left up to her. In the front row of the cheering, bustling crowd, Izuku Midoriya was not taking photographs with a smartphone. He was feverishly scribbling in a battered, densely packed notebook titled Hero Analysis for the Future. His pencil flew across the lined paper, capturing the tactical nuances, the collateral damage, and the precise mechanics of the brief skirmish. He was a quirkless boy, but his mind was an unparalleled, obsessive repository of heroic strategy. He documented Mount Lady's sudden appearance, theorizing on her physical limitations and practical applications of her quirk. As he sketched her costume and evaluated her combat approach, a middle-aged man standing next to him noticed his intense, unwavering dedication. The man chuckled warmly, noting Izuku's frantic writing. He wondered aloud if the boy was aiming to be a hero himself, and with a kind, encouraging smile, wished him good luck, kid. Izuku looked up from his notebook, his vibrant green eyes shining with a pure, unadulterated resolve. He happily answered the stranger, promising with absolute sincerity that he would do his best. The soaring euphoria of the morning's hero sighting evaporated entirely the moment Izuku stepped through the cold iron gates of Aldera Junior High. The school was a standard, utterly unremarkable institution in Musutafu, a place seemingly designed to funnel ordinary students into ordinary, predictable lives. The classroom was a sea of dark uniforms and buzzing teenage energy, a perfect microcosm of a society entirely obsessed with power, status, and genetic lottery. At the front of the room, the homeroom teacher stood before his desk, holding a thick stack of career aptitude printouts. He looked out at the class, a cynical, knowing smile playing on his lips. He lectured the students about considering their futures carefully, tapping the stack of papers against the wood. He announced that he was supposed to hand out the printouts so they could map out their desired life courses. However, in a sudden, theatrical motion, he tossed the entire stack high into the air, the crisp white papers fluttering down like a sudden snowfall over the desks. He laughed out loud, stating that he already knew they all wanted to be heroes. The classroom immediately erupted in a chaotic, joyful chorus of cheers. Students excitedly activated their minor quirks in a blatant display of youthful rebellion, hands elongating, small objects floating, sparks of electricity flying from fingertips, and strange appendages unfurling. The teacher hastily reminded them, waving his hands to regain order, that they were strictly not allowed to use their quirks during school hours, no matter how excited they were. Above the din, a single, arrogant voice cut through the noise, dripping with absolute, unfiltered contempt. Katsuki Bakugo was leaning back in his chair, his feet resting disrespectfully on the surface of his desk. He glared at his peers, his crimson eyes reflecting an unshakable, terrifying belief in his own supreme destiny. He loudly commanded the teacher not to group him with everyone else, declaring that he was completely superior. He mocked the entire class, claiming that their weak quirks would amount to nothing. His classmates yelled back, deeply insulted by his relentless arrogance, but Katsuki simply told them to shut up. The students quickly quieted down as they remembered a sobering, undeniable fact. Katsuki was aiming for UA High School. UA was the undisputed pinnacle of heroic academia in Japan, the very institution that had trained the legendary All Might. As the students began to murmur in awe about the staggering difficulty of the UA entrance exam, Katsuki leapt onto his desk, standing tall and casting a long, imposing shadow over the room. He declared fiercely that he had completely aced the mock exam and that he fully intended to surpass even All Might to become the undisputed top hero in the entire world. The teacher, flipping through his clipboard to review the career applications, casually noted the forms. Without looking up, he mentioned offhandedly that Izuku also wanted to go to UA High School. The silence that followed this announcement was absolute, suffocating, and terrifying. For a long heartbeat, the room was suspended in pure shock. Then the entire class turned to face Izuku, who was shrinking into his seat, trying desperately to become invisible. Moments later, the silence shattered. The classroom erupted in uproarious, mocking laughter. Izuku's classmates pointed and jeered, their voices a cruel, discordant symphony of ridicule. They sneered that there was absolutely no way he would be able to get into the prestigious hero course if all he could do was study. Izuku, his face burning with profound humiliation, stood up and attempted to defend himself. He stammered, waving his hands frantically, explaining that the school had recently eliminated the rule barring quirkless students from applying. Before he could finish his desperate defense, Katsuki moved with terrifying speed. He leapt across the room and aimed a point-blank explosion directly at Izuku's desk. The concussive blast blew Izuku out of his chair, sending him crashing to the floor as thick, acrid smoke billowed through the classroom. Katsuki stood over him, his palms smoking, his face twisted in a mask of pure fury. He snarled at Izuku, demanding to know why a quirkless nobody would dare to put himself on the same level as him. Izuku, trembling uncontrollably on the floor, looked up at his childhood tormentor. He desperately tried to explain his motives, his voice shaking with deep fear, but underlaid with a quiet, unbreakable resolve. He pleaded that he was not trying to compete with Katsuki. He explained that he was only trying to follow the beautiful dream he had held tightly since childhood, because, as he reasoned, he would not know if he could accomplish it if he didn't at least try. Katsuki scoffed, his eyes cold and devoid of any empathy. He declared definitively that the exam was impossible for him. As Katsuki spoke, the whole class looked down on Izuku, snickering and whispering, forever cementing the boy's isolation in a world that equated worth strictly with genetic power. The school bell eventually rang, signaling the end of the day, but the emotional torment was far from over. The classroom emptied, leaving Izuku alone to pack his scattered belongings. He sat at his damaged desk, staring blankly at his phone, scrolling through the news feeds detailing the morning's hero battles. He was just reaching for his prized notebook, ready to head home and synthesize his observations, when a dark shadow fell across his desk. Katsuki Bakugo stood there. Without a word, Katsuki snatched the Hero Analysis for the Future notebook straight from Izuku's hands. Izuku protested, reaching out for the book, but Katsuki casually pressed his explosive palms against the cover. A sharp crackle of heat echoed in the quiet room, and Katsuki burned Izuku's notebook, a localized explosion instantly charring the paper and melting the binding. Izuku recoiled, watching in sheer horror as the edges of his life's work blackened and curled, the pages smoking and smelling strongly of burning paper and ash. Katsuki did not stop there. With a casual, utterly disrespectful flick of his wrist, he tossed the smoldering notebook out the open third-story window. Izuku rushed to the window, his heart sinking into his stomach as he watched his dreams flutter down toward the school's courtyard. Katsuki turned back to Izuku, stepping uncomfortably close. He spoke in a low, dangerous tone, offering what he twistedly believed to be practical advice. He told Izuku, who stood completely paralyzed and did not reply to the taunts, that he should completely give up on UA. Then, with a chilling lack of humanity, Katsuki offered a horrific suggestion. If Izuku wanted a quirk so badly, he should dive off the rooftop and pray for a quirk in his next life. Izuku froze, the sheer, unimaginable cruelty of the words anchoring him heavily to the floor. Katsuki turned and walked out, leaving the quirkless boy standing entirely alone in the suffocating silence of the empty classroom. Slowly, methodically, moving like a ghost, Izuku made his way down to the courtyard. He found his notebook floating miserably in a shallow koi pond, the fish nibbling curiously at the waterlogged burnt pages. He knelt by the water's edge, carefully lifting the ruined book from the pond. As he brushed the dirt, algae, and ash from the cover, the painful memories of his childhood washed over him like a cold tide. He remembered the sterile, unfeeling environment of a medical clinic from years ago. A young Izuku, clutching an All Might action figure, sat on a crinkling, paper-lined examination table alongside his mother, Inko. Dr. Tsubasa, a bald man with an air of clinical detachment, sat before a glowing light box. Clipped to the board was an X-ray of young Izuku's feet. The doctor did not offer gentle bedside manner. He delivered his prognosis with the blunt force of a falling anvil. He instructed Izuku to give up on his dreams. The doctor pointed to the skeletal structure of Izuku's foot, explaining the prevailing evolutionary theory of quirks. As the human form evolved to accommodate superhuman abilities, certain vestigial parts of the anatomy were phased out. The doctor tapped the X-ray, highlighting the pinky toe. He possessed 2 joints in his pinky toe. This seemingly insignificant anatomical trait was an undeniable biological confirmation of a devastating reality. The extra joint showed that he was quirkless. He was an artifact of a bygone era. Later, that exact same day, the Midoriya apartment was suffocated by a heavy, mournful silence. Within the darkened confines of Izuku's bedroom, the soft blue glow of a computer monitor cut through the pitch-black space. Izuku sat in his desk chair, watching a video on a continuous, desperate loop. It was a famous clip of a disaster scene. Amid the chaos, All Might emerged from the rubble, saving over 100 people with a fearless, booming laugh. Izuku watched the video again, crying silently, the tears streaming down his chubby cheeks. The bedroom door creaked open, and Inko Midoriya stood in the threshold, her eyes red and swollen. Izuku slowly turned his chair to face her, pointing a shaky finger at the monitor. He asked his mother, his voice a fragile, desperate plea, if he could still be a hero like All Might. Inko's composure crumbled. She crossed the room, falling to her knees and wrapping her arms tightly around her son, to which she started crying and apologized, sobbing, "I'm sorry, Izuku. I wish things were different." For Izuku, the apology was the final, devastating blow. It was an admission of defeat. He did not need an apology. He needed someone to tell him that he could do it. Elsewhere in the city, chaos was brewing, entirely unconcerned with the heartbreak of a junior high schooler. A terrifying entity known to the authorities as the sludge villain was on the loose. This villain possessed an unnamed quirk that transformed his entire physical body into a massive, fluid, slime-like substance. He was a predatory creature capable of hijacking the bodies of ordinary citizens, forcing his liquid form down their throats to pilot them from the inside out. The sludge villain was fleeing a crime scene, moving with surprising fluid speed down a busy commercial street. As a crowd nearby watched him run away, a sense of weary resignation settled over the onlookers. A person in the crowd sighed heavily, commenting with profound exhaustion that there is no end to villains. Suddenly, a massive, muscular figure stepped out from the shadows. A man then answers the civilian, his voice booming like thunder, that there indeed is an end to them because he is there. Unaware of the drama unfolding downtown, Izuku Midoriya was walking home, his damp, burnt notebook clutched tightly against his chest. His path took him through a dim, concrete bridge tunnel. The air inside the underpass was cool and damp, the sound of his footsteps echoing hollowly against the curved walls. He was lost in his thoughts, trying to forcefully cheer his own broken spirit. Behind him, a metallic grate shifted. From the dark sewers, a mass of dark green mud began to ooze and expand. The sludge villain, desperately fleeing the terrifying pursuit of the hero, had chosen this dark tunnel as his escape route. As the villain rose to his full, towering height, his liquid body churning with debris and malice, his bulbous yellow eyes locked on to the solitary boy. Izuku turned at the sound of sloshing sludge, his eyes widening in pure terror. Before he could scream, before he could even command his legs to run, the villain pounced. A tidal wave of foul-tasting, viscous slime slammed into Izuku, wrapping tightly around his limbs and torso. The sludge villain attempts to steal Izuku's body. The liquid forcefully intruded into Izuku's mouth and nose, instantly cutting off his air supply. Izuku clawed frantically at the slime, his fingers slipping uselessly through the fluid mass. He was suffocating, his lungs burning with an agonizing need for oxygen. The villain's voice echoed directly into Izuku's ears, a wet, gargling sound that chilled the boy to the bone. The monster mocked his victim's struggles, telling Izuku to calm down. He promised with sadistic reassurance that it would only hurt for about 45 seconds before it would all be over. The darkness began to close in around the edges of Izuku's vision. The quirkless boy was going to die in a dark tunnel, his dreams ending as nothing more than wet ash. Just as Izuku's consciousness began to slip away into the suffocating abyss, a heavy metallic clang echoed through the tunnel. The manhole cover was blasted off its hinges, clattering loudly against the concrete. From the darkness of the subterranean drain, a massive, impossible silhouette emerged. Suddenly, All Might appeared. The towering height, the massive muscularity, the two distinct tufts of blonde hair sweeping backward like golden horns were unmistakable. The sludge villain recoiled in horror, recognizing the man who had been relentlessly hunting him. The villain prepared to lash out, extending a tendril of toxic mud like a whip. But All Might was faster. He planted his feet, cracking the concrete beneath his heavy boots. He drew his massive fist back, his muscles coiling tight. With a thunderous battle cry, he uses Texas Smash against the villain. He threw the punch without even making physical contact with the slime. The sheer, unadulterated force of the blow compressed the air within the tunnel, generating a localized hurricane. It was a powerful wind pressure move that defeats the villain. The powerful wind pressure tore through the underpass, hitting the sludge villain with the force of a freight train. The villain's liquid body was instantly blown apart, scattering into countless harmless splatters of mud against the tunnel walls. The wind blew Izuku backward, freeing him from his suffocating prison. As he fell to the ground, gasping for precious air, Izuku vaguely sees All Might and faints shortly thereafter. The sheer relief, combined with the extreme lack of oxygen, finally overwhelmed the boy, sending him into a deep, peaceful unconsciousness. When Izuku slowly opened his eyes, the world was a blurry, disorienting haze. A massive hand was gently but firmly tapping his cheek. He blinked, bringing his surroundings into focus. He was no longer in danger. He was lying on the concrete floor of the tunnel, the air clear and breathable. He looked up, and his heart nearly stopped. Once Izuku wakes up, he's shocked to see his idol right in front of him. All Might stood there, larger than life, his hands on his hips and his signature smile shining brightly in the gloom of the underpass. Izuku scrambled backward, his mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. He bowed frantically, stammering his profound gratitude. He suddenly realized he needed to capture this moment. He frantically searched for his charred notebook, and he asks for his autograph, but sees it's already in his notebook. Spread across 2 entire pages, written in bold, sweeping marker strokes, was All Might's enormous signature. Izuku bowed repeatedly, treating the notebook as if it were a holy relic. After seeing that Izuku is safe, All Might starts leaving with the villain in his custody. The hero had collected the scattered sludge into 2 plastic soda bottles, safely securing the threat. He turned away from the boy, bending his knees to prepare for a colossal leap, explaining that he needed to deliver the villain to the authorities. But Izuku's mind was screaming. This was it! This was the moment! The hero was leaving, and Izuku had not asked the one question that defined his entire painful existence. He needed to know. As All Might leaped into the air, ascending with the speed of a fired missile, Izuku lunged. He grabs onto his leg and ends up flying with him. Now the quirkless boy was hurtling through the air, dangling hundreds of feet above the sprawling metropolis. The wind roared furiously, tearing at Izuku's clothes. When All Might realizes it, he tells Izuku to let go of him, warning that this was incredibly dangerous. Izuku, his eyes watering from the extreme wind velocity, screamed back over the roaring air. Izuku says he'd die if he did. Realizing the terrifying logic of the boy's statement, All Might ceased his attempts to shake the boy loose, so All Might looks for a place to land. However, a sudden alarming development occurred. A sharp, violent cough racked All Might's massive frame. All Might starts bleeding from his mouth and gets worried due to it. A small stream of crimson blood trailed off his chin, whipping away in the wind. The hero grew deeply anxious, knowing that his closely guarded time limit was rapidly approaching. With a heavy, reverberating thud, All Might lands on the rooftop of a building. The impact cracked the concrete beneath his boots. Izuku, trembling violently from the sheer terror of the flight and the overwhelming adrenaline, collapsed onto his hands and knees. He gasped for breath, his heart hammering wildly, trying to process the fact that he had just flown across the city clinging to a living god. All Might turned his back to the boy, wiping the blood from his chin, his breathing labored and heavy. He was anxious, needing to leave immediately before his greatest secret could be exposed to this reckless child. He began to walk toward the roof access door, ready to leave the boy behind. Izuku stared at the broad, muscular back of the symbol of peace. The hero was walking away. The opportunity was slipping through his fingers like sand. All the mockery of Aldera Junior High, all the cruelty of Katsuki's explosive words, the crushing finality of Dr. Tsubasa's X-ray, and the haunting sorrow of his mother's tearful apology swelled within him. He needed a definitive answer. Izuku pushed himself up off the cold concrete. He stood trembling in the wind, his burnt notebook clutched tightly in his hand. He looked at the retreating figure of the greatest hero the world had ever known, the man who represented the absolute pinnacle of human evolution and power. Izuku called out, his voice a fragile, desperate sound against the howling wind of the rooftop. Izuku asks the man if someone who doesn't have a quirk could also be a hero like him. The question hung in the air, carrying the weight of a lifetime of impossible dreams.